Hey, nobody drives in LA. New Year's Eve edition. Well, maybe we call this one, No One Should Be Driving on New Year's Eve in LA. Anyway, if you're listening to this episode as it comes out, Metro is offering free rides on their trains, buses, and Metro bike share from 4 a.m. on New Year's Eve through 3 a.m. on New Year's Day. The A, B, D, and E lines are running all night on New Year's Eve, and the C and K lines will run until 2 a.m. For New Year's Day, all trains and buses are running on a holiday schedule. The Metro bike share free rides will cap at 30 minutes. Be safe, have fun, and maybe I'll run into you at Grand Park. But now for the interview at hand. Eric and I sat down in the Koreatown LA Public Library Media Lab with Michael Schneider of Streets for All. We talked about the city's unrealized Mobility Plan 2035, Measure HLA, taking your bike to LAX, e-cargo bikes as an alternative to SUVs, street design, and most importantly, how individuals can become engaged in civics, activism, and local policy making. Quick note. We recorded this interview back in the summer, and since then, Streets for All has started a members club program that gives donors a vote for SFA endorsements and other perks. They do amazing work, and if this is something you'd like to donate to, check out their members club. We'll link to it in the show notes. I love how Michael emphasizes how easy it is to get involved. One thing he said that has stuck with me is that if you want to make a change, just ask your council what they need to get it done. I am prone to overthinking everything. And Michael, and as have so many of our guests and the mobility activists I've run into at various events, remind us that it's so easy once you get started. How many signatures do they need to consider it? Then go out and get them. So let's get it, shall we? How did you get here today?
I rode an electric cargo bike because I'm picking up my 4-year-old after this. And I'm going to kind of protect her and follow her home.
You know, I am not a child haver, nor do I think I'm going to be a child haver, but I was
an interesting phrase, child haver.
What else do you call them?
As opposed to child taker? Right?
Parent.
Oh yeah, parents, right. But like if you're a parent, how do you if you're a parent who's car free or mostly car free, like how do you get your kid around?
Well, I went through an evolution. Do you actually want me to tell you that story? Yeah. Or are we still doing sound check?
I'm recording as well. So,
oh, okay.
So
when I first started this, and happy to tell you more about that, it was just me on a bicycle. And then my wife and I had a kid, and I got in a lot of trouble the first time I tried to carry my kid. First of all, my wife was thinking that I was going to kill our kid by trying to carry her. So I had to get over that. But I didn't know what I was doing, and I put a basically 1-year-old in a trailer behind us, and we biked to a restaurant. Not realizing that the 1-year-old was way too small to be in the trailer, and every bump she felt like 10x. And we got to the restaurant and walked into the restaurant, and as I'm locking up our bikes, I hear my wife kind of screaming because the 1-year-old's throwing up all over the floor of the restaurant. And she's like, never again, it's never going on the bike. So I needed to come up with something better. And I eventually realized that when they're that little, they like being in front with you, clipping in. And when you're just holding your handlebar, it's kind of like you're hugging them. They love that. So once I figured that out, that was one kid. And then we had a second kid. So I got a seat on my back rack and had a seat in front. But when number 3 came around, I was like, man, I don't know. Do I put one on my shoulders here? Like, what do I do? And I did a lot of research because I didn't want to be forced into a car. And I landed on an electric cargo bike, a Bachfiets, where the bucket's in front. And it has 3 seats with 3 seat belts. It's electric. It has suspension, so makes it nice and comfy even on kind of shitty LA roads. And that is how I take all 3 of my kids around today. That is my SUV. We even go to and from the airport with that thing, and it can carry a trailer behind it with luggage. So it's very versatile.
Do they love it?
The kids love it. I have an accomplice. So the first time I tried to convince my wife to bike to LAX, she was like, you're crazy. I was like,
people probably would think that.
Yeah, I guess it sounds kind of crazy. But I had an accomplice in my 8-year-old because she said, Mommy, I get nauseous in the backseat of cars, but I never get nauseous on the bike. And I said, see, you got to listen to the kid. Do you want your kids to get nauseous? And that really helped. And so Once we did it once and everything was fine, the kids will basically always choose the bike over a car. The only time they won't, our car unfortunately has a screen in the second row, and the kids know that on longer trips they get to choose a movie, which I kind of hate, but that sometimes competes. But in general, they will choose the bike over the car.
Do you rig up a phone or an iPad so your kids if they're just sitting in the seats, they can sort of bring it along with them? Is that a safety hazard?
I probably could. I don't want them having more screen time, but
Fair.
I bought a Bluetooth speaker, and I am their DJ. And so they fight over who chooses the music, who chooses the next song, but then they have a great time. They get to hear music. If they want to have a snack, they have a snack, and they watch the world go by at a slower pace, which is always nice.
My mom, when I was little, rode with us on her bike with me on a bike seat. My mom also had 3 kids, but I don't remember how I mean, it's also like we did it from such a young age. I don't remember, I started riding my own bike.
It's the 1940s, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't remember where my brother and sister were. So I don't know if, I don't know if we just took turns. I think she rode a lot recreationally because we lived out in the country. So we weren't riding necessarily to her classes or anything like that.
I think it's recent that the technology has caught up with the need. Meaning, if you go to the Netherlands, for example, you'll see entire families, 3-4 people on one bicycle, and they're just kind of anywhere they can fit a limb, that's where the limb goes. But that really only works, A, for really safe infrastructure environments, which I wouldn't call Los Angeles that, or B, for relatively flat terrain. So this is the first time, I'd say in the last 5 to 7 years, is the first time that e-bikes and specifically electric cargo bikes have caught up to the need of parents. And that has made, at least for me, a huge difference. My bike did not exist 5+ years ago.
I have a part-time job at a grocery store delivering, and we use Kias for everything. And a lot of our orders are within 2 blocks, and it's like 1 bag of toilet paper. And I always just think, like, wouldn't it be nice if we just had an e-cargo bike parked in the store, and it would get like the store attention, which I'm not going to name because no free promo, but if they had an e-cargo bike for like just little short runs like that with where it was an order that we could fit, I just feel like that would be so much, because I hate, sometimes they've told me not to walk because of, we're supposed to drive everywhere, but I don't want to give up the parking spot in the parking lot. Someone said it was a liability. I don't know. I think it's just, managers don't want to ask questions about the way you do things.
That's interesting. I do sort of in a related note about like liability and stuff. I do a lot of food donations. My main job, one of many these days, is I do sustainability on commercials. And part of that is organizing food donations with all the leftover catering food. And there's so much of it. A lot of caterers that we'll talk to are like, no, I don't want to give you any food because it's going to be liability. Turns out that you have 2 layers of protection in the state of California for that. There's a state bill that was signed by Governor Brown. That's a Good Samaritan law, that if you donate food to a nonprofit and it's fit to eat when you donate it, you're protected. There's also an older law, I believe it was from the Clinton era at the federal level, that is much the same, that if you donate food to a nonprofit, you're not, you can't be held liable for that if it's fit to eat at the time you donate it. Whenever I tell caterers about this, or, production supervisors or whoever's giving me guff about doing food donations, they're just like, whoa, I had no idea. And I wonder how much of that is a similar situation, like with your grocery overlords, if perhaps there is, if there's a carve out that you could throw at them. And imagine too, with your idea for the bike for the grocery store, they would probably save so much money in gas and in time, because it's probably going to be faster to go 2 miles.
It definitely takes longer to get a car out of a lot, drive around a block, and then they made a deal when they opened the store to not drive on the street that the grocery store is on, because people feel entitled to not have more cars that have their cars on that street. So you have to do an enormous loop just to, deliver somebody
I think it would also improve employee morale. I mean,
yeah.
It's so much fun to ride an electric cargo bike. Even if there's no cargo in it, if there's some cargo, if it's full, it's just fun. And I bet you'd have a hell of a lot more fun, and your job would be more enjoyable along with everyone else there if they weren't stuck looking for parking or in traffic.
Yeah, we always talk about how much fun it is to ride a bike. And when it's not fun, it's made not fun by cars.
And think of employee health outcomes too. I'm sure companies love doing employee health initiatives. Why not tie it into a bike contest? Who gets the most steps? Who gets the most miles on their bike? I'm sure they can get some sort of insurance rebate or discount for enacting a policy like that.
Never underestimate the unwillingness to change or adapt, though, because, during COVID, I was told by a manager, now is not the time to innovate. When I had an idea about doing pickup orders and putting it through a window instead of having people in the store the day after COVID numbers reach their highest number. So never underestimate that. But
Lovely.
Are you going to talk about how you got here, or are we going to talk about how we got here? Usually we talk about our commuter routes.
Okay, so that is a long-winded way of saying welcome to Nobody Drives in LA, a podcast all about getting around the city of Los Angeles without a car. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle. I am the editor of the podcast. I'm on the west side, so I do a lot of walking. I ride a one-wheel, and I'm a big proponent of the E-line, though today I had to rush out my door to catch the BBB Rapid 7 to get here to the Koreatown Pico Public Library Media Lab, where we are recording.
And I'm Eric Brightwell, the other co-host, and my route here changed a lot. I was going to take the 182 to the 203, and then nature called right as I was getting ready to leave. So I took the 92 to the D line, and then I got off the D line 2 stops too soon because I was just kind of in my head. And I went up the escalator and I realized, oh no, I'm at Wilshire, Vermont, not Wilshire Western. And I had about 10 seconds to think wait, there's the 720 right there. I'll just hop on the 720. So I got here 1 minute later than I would have if I'd stayed on the train. So it was not too bad. And also we were slowed down because there was a car with its hazards on in the bus only lane, just sitting there and waving the bus to go around, which is very difficult with a giant articulated bus on Wilshire when there's traffic. But entitled motorists, they're a real thing.
And today we have a guest who is
Michael Schneider.
From Streets for All, right?
Yes.
We specifically reached out to you because Kyle wanted to know about the implementation of HLA, and I thought you would be probably the person to talk about the implementation of HLA and what just HLA in general.
Maybe we should start with why we felt the need for HLA to exist.
Yeah.
Let me back up a little bit. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, meaning I was born to drive a car everywhere.
Did you start at 16?
16 at about 8:15 in the morning, I had my license. I could not wait. And I, frankly, was one of those people that drove everywhere, complained about traffic, and said LA's biggest problem was there wasn't enough parking. So I understand the mindset, I think, of a lot of people in this town. 10 years ago, for a number of reasons, I decided to go car-free, and I have been car-free since then, just using a bicycle to get around. When I say that to people, it sounds crazy to a lot of people, and they often say, well, what about when you had kids, or what about this, or what about that? And actually my setup, I've been able to evolve with kids and with life, and thankfully I'm still car-free a decade later. I started Streets for All in 2019 out of immense frustration. We live in a city with some of the best weather in the world. We live in a city where it's relatively flat. And I radicalized myself with facts and data and too many YouTube videos and reading too many books, frankly, about what happens when you design cities around cars versus people. And I realized I'd been living in the Matrix. We are in a city that is completely designed around cars. And the most amazing thing about LA, and I think it's unique to any other city in the world, is we snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. 100 years ago, we had the biggest public transit system in the world. It was unbelievable, the red cars and yellow cars. Our streets didn't start off this way, but starting in the 40s with freeway development, it got really bad, and it's just been 80 years of optimizing our streets for cars. So I started to get pissed off at how unsafe it was for me to ride a bike. That's really messed up. I'm not taking up a parking space. I am not making traffic worse, and yet I'm having to risk my life just because I don't want to use a car. That doesn't seem fair to me. So Streets for All was my attempt to fix that by starting with supporting candidates running for LA City Council that supported those values of a walkable, bikeable, transit-friendly Los Angeles. We spent 2 years. We learned about the city's mobility plan, which if you haven't seen it, it's actually pretty great. It's thousands of miles of safety improvements for pedestrians.
What year was the mobility plan put out?
2015.
Okay.
Passed by council. And it would change about half the streets in the city to be safer for pedestrians, easier for transit riders, safer for cyclists. It's a really good plan. And they've just completely ignored it. I mean, they've done 5% in 8 years.
Not
and
completely ignored. 5% has been
5%.
implemented.
Fair enough. They've done a little bit.
We're on track for what, 200 years, 300 years to get it done?
We did the math. It's supposed to be a 20-year plan. At the current pace, it would be a 160-year plan, and we'll just all be dead, and the Earth will be on fire from climate change. But we spent 2 years begging council offices to implement the plan in their district whenever the street was repaved. That's the lowest hanging fruit. When you're repaving a street, you have to restripe it anyway. Easiest stripe in a bike lane, a bus lane, a crosswalk, etc.
Had you seen a mobility plan in another city and the implementation have the same issues? Were you inspired by that, or did you just develop this idea in Streets for All?
Most cities have decent plans they're ignoring, in fairness to Los Angeles. But there's exceptions. Cambridge, Massachusetts, much smaller place, but doing a great job. Seattle has a similar ordinance, and they're making a lot more progress. So we were inspired by other places. So that was the genesis. If we're going to be ignored by the city, if the city is going to choose to ignore its own plan over and over, and essentially close to zero council members, there are a few exceptions, going to have a backbone and stand up and say, I'm going to put in that bike lane even though it removes parking. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do, and people shouldn't have to risk their life to ride a bike. That political will was lacking. So what HLA does is it mandates, it's a law now, that anytime the city repaves a street, they have to put in their own plan. And when we were collecting signatures, the number one question we got was, why do you need to create a law if the city council already passed this saying they want to do it? Why are we signing this? What is this? And the truth is, it's a great question, but it was just a suggestion before. The plan was a suggestion. It was not required. Now it's required.
The city loves to celebrate plans. It loves to make great plans.
We do the best plans.
Yeah. And then we're like...
And the best press
and
conferences.
We celebrate, yeah.
That seems similar to at the state level in terms of like the composting bill, SB 1383, right? That the previous composting bills and waste ordinances from the 90s, from the early 2000s, very much lacked an enforcement mechanism that like, oh, great, we need cities to recycle 50% of their waste or 90% of their waste, but don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen if you don't. And so when SB 1383 came around, there are now consequences if you're not composting, which I think is fantastic, right?
But we're still not implementing that much either, right? I haven't seen any green bins at apartment buildings because we don't have a plan in place to make it happen.
So that's really interesting. I've heard from different people about that, but so my building, for instance, in Santa Monica, we have composting, and the building that I used to live at also has composting.
Was it also in Santa Monica?
Also in Santa Monica.
So its own city, which
Yeah.
Los Angeles, I haven't seen any.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard. I was talking to someone from Burbank Recycling, and they were saying that a loophole that under the previous ordinance that that building managers would use to get around this is they would say, we're going to use what's called a dirty MRF, where essentially you would just throw all of your stuff, your recycling bag, your landfill bag, into one big old box. The hauler would use their robots and dark magic to sort it out. In reality, so a building would only have to get one dumpster for all of their waste. And so you're technically in compliance with, the composting law, the recycling law. Right, but in practice, doesn't actually happen. So supposedly, from what I understand, and I might be getting this information a little wrong, that over the past 2 years, like any of the buildings that don't have composting now are out of compliance with that current law. So perhaps if you wanted to be quite evil, you could start, file a complaint or reporting people, because the window for their compliance is passed on that. For most cities that are above like a certain population threshold.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far down that compost hole, but
Yeah, right.
it is something that I've brought up in neighborhood council. Yeah, there's stuff that's not there yet, but because yes, they did a year pass, they were like, we're going to give people a year to comply, but then they still don't have the system in place to pick that up citywide, from what I understand. But
I don't think this is unique. I mean, there's so many things in cities across North America that are just suggestions. And the reality is we live in a noisy world. Politicians are busy. They want to get reelected. They don't love controversy. And unless something is required, it's very hard to get anything really good done.
Well, it's also really easy, it seems, to say, we're going to implement this thing and it will be done in 20 years and it sounds really good, and then your term ends in 6 or whatever, 9, like you're like, I'll be somewhere else. I'll have rotated in the musical chairs to county supervisor or something, I won't be in that position. So there's no one's holding your feet to it.
But look at Measure M and Measure R. Metro is actually building the projects promised to voters in Measure M and Measure R because they're legally mandated to. These things work.
You do a quick define on Measure M and Measure R.
Yes. So I'm going to get the years slightly wrong, I think, but I want to say in 2012 or 14, what was R? Maybe even earlier, 10?
I'm so bad at remembering.
Okay.
this.
Well, Measure R was 10 plus years ago. Measure M boosted it. And what it was a series of massive plans for our public transportation system, mainly new rail lines. It included other things too, but that was the big deal. And so the Purple Line extension that's about to open under Wilshire Boulevard is an example of a project. The Crenshaw Line that is connecting to the airport next year is an example, and a lot of others. And so voters approved this, and then all of a sudden Metro had a legal obligation and money from the sales tax increase to implement those projects.
I mean, that's one thing you see in Los Angeles too, is voters over and over voting to make stuff happen. That the people that don't have political will say, I don't want to piss off my constituents, but then the constituents vote and say, can you please make this happen? Why are we voting on this again? Can you raise my taxes to fund this? Like what? And we want to see results. I mean, the fact is, at least the majority of people responding to surveys say that they would like to not be forced to be in their car as much. And I'm sure there are some people that will never get out of their car no matter what. I've been in Manhattan and seen that, and I'm like, it's crazy to me that I get an anxiety attack just thinking about the hypothetical situation of being in a car in Manhattan when you can walk and take a train everywhere.
One thing that HLA did above everything else is it showed that Angelenos want a bikeable, walkable, transit-friendly city. It had nearly 2/3 of the vote. Citywide, in some districts, it had close to 80%. That was in Hollywood. Even in the deep San Fernando Valley, the most suburban parts of Los Angeles, it was over 50%. So if politicians that have a survival bone in their body, they want to get reelected, they want to be popular with their constituents, should listen to that. Angelenos want this stuff.
So what kind of improvements does HLA, mandate as part of it when it passed? Like what passed with HLA?
The city's mobility plan became mandatory. So the question is, what is in that? There are, I'm going off memory here, and I've not been in campaign mode for 4 months, so I may be a little fuzzy, but I want to say there's about 1,400 miles of bike lanes across the city that will get built. There's about 300 miles of bus-only lanes that will get built. There are over 1,000 miles of the neighborhood enhanced network, which is traffic calming on residential streets to slow cars down and just make it more peaceful, more walkable, bikeable on neighborhood streets. And then there's the pedestrian enhanced district network, which is a series of everything. It's sort of a toolbox of options, but it could be everything from a raised crosswalk or a new crosswalk or a newly signalized crosswalk or curb extensions, things like that.
Can we talk a little bit about the opposition to HLA? So I live on Rowena, and we had bike lanes put in, I don't remember how many years ago, but we had pushback from our neighborhood council at the time, and they refunded a study to prove that it was bad, and the city council person...
And what did David Rue do?
he spent that money on that survey, and then we said... But I went to that meeting, I remember, with the neighborhood council, and because this wasn't the Police Protective League or the Fire Department Union or whatever. This was just people from the fire station on Rowena came and said, our response times are so much better. Now that there's a center lane, we can drive down that and cars can pull over into the bike lane. We're not stuck behind 4 lanes of gridlock anymore. And the police were like, yeah, our response times are down too, and we don't have to respond to as much stuff. So on that note, you would think the good faith argument would seem to be that emergency responders would be all for HLA, but that was not necessarily the case.
I wouldn't characterize it that way because it wasn't the fire department or the police department that opposed HLA. It was the union that represented the firefighters, UFLAC. That's an important distinction. So I'll tell you what they said, and then I'll tell you what I think really happened. What they said was... by the way, totally ignoring the fact that the city has had this plan in place since 2015. They acted like we
could have protested sooner.
We invented it, exactly.
Right.
They could have been on the ballot as the opposition.
Yeah.
They weren't. So what they said was, if this passes and the mobility plan actually gets implemented, then fires are going to happen and the building might just burn down because we can't get there. Or you might have a heart attack and the ambulance can't get to you.
There will be so many bikes in the bike lane that they can't pull over and the fire trucks are stuck.
It was such nonsense. And the fire station they chose to have their press conference at to announce their opposition was in front of LA's first, and I think still only, concrete protected bike lane on 7th in downtown LA. And the most amazing thing was, as they were doing their press conference, someone got a call and the fire engine pulled out just fine and went off to wherever it was going. And I just thought it was such an amazing backdrop to not prove their point. Anyway, that's what they said, that this is going to slow down emergency response time. It's a waste of money.
It seemed like they were throwing a lot of arguments at the wall and seeing if any of them stuck.
Well, typically, I mean, there's two people. Someone told me, I'd never run a ballot measure before, and someone said there's two groups you never want against you. One is teachers, and two is firefighters. Those are heroes in almost everyone's mind. You don't want them against you. So it was heartbreaking to stand up and, bird dog their press conference when it's a bunch of firefighters saying this stuff. Having said that, I'm not sure they even believe their concerns, and I think they were given talking points. I think behind the scenes, they were told that they might not get their raises or might not get as big of a raise from inside the city if this passes, because it's going to cost all this money. If you remember at the time, the city administrative officer estimated that HLA was going to cost the city over $300 million a year, and a bike lane is $2 million per mile to implement.
Can we just, like a quick aside about that? Because I didn't understand the rationale of the cost, because it seems like if you're resurfacing a street anyway, and to implement what you are planning on doing in the future at the time that you're resurfacing it, instead of coming back and redoing it in the future, would save money, right?
That presumes they were going to redo it.
Right.
I think they assume they just leave it out.
Right.
But the idea that a bike lane would cost up to $2 million per mile is just so laughable.
I wonder what the Crosswalk Collective would say about like how much it costs them to
What do they spend? $3,000 for 10 crosswalks?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was a completely disingenuous argument. The numbers were all cooked, and thankfully they didn't get their way. The other main opposition came from Councilmember Tracy Park on the west side of Los Angeles, who essentially was in lockstep with UFLAG, saying, the firefighters oppose this, is very dangerous. She even had the audacity to claim, we've tried this already and it doesn't work. And when you've only implemented 5% of a plan, to say we've tried this is pretty audacious.
Yeah. She was also on the city's transportation committee, correct?
She still is.
She still is? Okay. Yeah. I wonder if maybe part of the budget fears that they were seriously worried about were due to the fact that they foresaw that maybe the mayor would cut funding to 26 departments and agencies to give one department a raise of almost the exact same amount.
Again, that presumes the city had good intent with those numbers. The CAO did something extraordinary about 3-4 weeks before the election. Typically, under the Brown Act, you have to have something on the agenda to be able to discuss it. HLA was not on the agenda this day. And the CAO had prepared a presentation about HLA that he gave to council. We got tipped off in advance, so thankfully we were there and able to respond, in which he essentially said, the sky is going to fall if this thing passes. And if it passes, we're going to return to council immediately and ask what you want to cut to fund the $300 million per year. Now, let me say something. I would love it if the city spent $300 million a year on our streets. They would look fantastic.
On transit improvements, yeah.
Do you want to know, I want you to guess how much was in this budget specific to HLA?
Oh my God, you guess.
I don't know, like a million?
They said $300 million.
Like
a million?
$1 million?
$140,000 for a GIS specialist, for maybe a GIS specialist and a half. So they were going to subcontract some to do the dashboard that it required. So we went from $300 million to about $100,000.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Which is less than an ADA compliant curb cut costs to put on a sidewalk.
I don't know how those things cost so much.
Yeah, they're like $250,000.
We could go to Home Depot right now, get some very talented folks to help us, and probably do one.
Well, I will say I have done some guerrilla stuff, including making sidewalks where there weren't any. And the one we made was janky, but the city replaced it with a proper one almost immediately afterwards. So it's funny how things happen like that sometimes.
I think that's been one of the strategies behind Crosswalk Collective. The city erases some of their stuff, or they just repaint over it.
Right. Yeah.
Describe this guerrilla sidewalk initiative. Like, do you just show up with some cement and wood, hack it together?
I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about...
Do you know what you're doing?
Yeah. I was doing this as part of guerrilla gardening, which is a different, sort of tactical...
Well, tell me about that, because I have a pile of wildflower seeds that I'm just itching to, cannon out there.
So I don't think they're still active. There used to be a group called Los Angeles Guerrilla Gardening, which is how I met a lot of friends that I'm still friends with to this day. This was around 2010 I joined after having heard about guerrilla gardening in 2009. And then one of the guerrilla gardening operations that we did was we went on every stop of the Red Line, At the time, it was the red line still. Got
It's
off.
still colored red.
Yeah.
So you're
We
not
got
wrong.
off at every stop. There would be a band playing. All these people would pitch in and plant a bunch of stuff at the station in the public landscaping area where it's usually just trampled in dirt. Then we'd catch the next train and then do the same thing all the way down until we got downtown, and then we went to a bar. And it was a lot of fun. However, almost everything that we planted was trampled into oblivion pretty quickly. So I still do guerrilla gardening on my own, but with some of those lessons that I've learned about, you can't just put a tiny little jade plant or aloe next to a heavily trafficked area. You have to put bigger stuff. So I plant hardier stuff.
I think the point is that a lot of the stuff the city says is so complicated, takes so long, costs so much. Maybe it costs more than you or I doing it, and it's probably done better.
Right.
But it's pretty overblown.
Yeah, I do it for free. And I mean, the way I started was getting it out of a green bin on like the compost, the day they pick up the green bins. I grabbed somebody's cut agave attenuata, stuck that in a dead tree square on a sidewalk next to a bus stop, and now that's like all filled out with basil shoots, and it's like this big bushy agave thing. And sometimes people complain to me, "Why did you plant agave?" And I'm like, "Well, because I can't carry a sycamore, you know." Sorry.
But I love that idea. There's a lot of dirt tree wells that are kind of just sitting there. And they require watering for the first year or two until the root
To get
system take
established,
hold.
yeah.
But that would be a cool project to go around the city and just plant trees wherever there's dirt.
Well, I guess I might as well talk about it now then, because even though, I mean, it is transit related. You know, people drive more slowly when there are things growing on the sidewalk. I got pulled over for speeding once, and it was, honestly, I had no idea how fast I was driving because I was driving through this Central Valley, and everything's just flat and looked the same. And there was no sense of perspective. And also, I did have a car at the time that if I drove it over 55 miles an hour, I'd feel like it was going to shake apart. And so this was a rental. And I told the officer, I was like, I had no idea it was going like 90 miles an hour or whatever. I was just like, there was nothing around. It just felt like I was sitting still. But anyway, I plant on all these dead tree squares, tree wells along sidewalks usually. I have had, it's technically illegal. I've had police, and I put the trowel down just to be safe, you know. But nobody's ever said anything. Nobody, you know, they usually just like slow down. They look and they're like, okay, looks like he's planning something, not like stealing copper wiring or anything. I have, in the neighborhood council in Silver Lake, I'm proposing, because it's technically illegal, it can't be something that we do through the neighborhood council exactly, but I'm going to start a Silver Lake, because I can't do it all by myself. And some of them are too far away for me to walk to carrying plants. But somebody else, you know, I talked to 2 days ago walking around the reservoir, and she said, I have a pickup truck. And I was like, so I was like, I'm going to start identifying them in just Silver Lake. And there are about 20, and they're in about 12 spots. A lot of times it's like 3 dead ones next to each other. And I was like, 12 spots? If we had like 6 people, we could knock this out in a night. And then get the business behind this to buy in and say, we'll pour some water on this until it gets established. And then once winter comes, they'll take off. And then I thought we could, you know, and then from there we could expand throughout the city. But yeah, so that is a campaign that I'm kind of working on, an effort that I'm kind of trying to do.
The other thing trees do, of course, is they make it a lot friendlier to walk on the street with shade.
They do. They provide shade. They, you know, especially if they're natives, they're compatible with what they call the wood wide web in some circles, where they have symbiotic relationships with local fauna and other flora and fungi, which are very important to make the soil healthy. So there's really, it's nice when you plant, when you have just anything growing along a sidewalk. But I have had a couple instances where people removed them. And in one, they filled in the tree square with concrete after I did that. So you can't get too hurt about it if you do it, because you don't know what's going through somebody's mind. Sometimes people erroneously, I'm just going to insert in, think that if there's a tree in front of their business, that they think that most of the business comes from people driving cars on their way home or to work, and they look over and they think, oh wow, look at that. And then if there's a tree in the way, they're like, I can't see what's there, so I'm not going to stop, when that's not how you get your traffic to your business.
There's 2 recent insane examples of that. A few years ago, I worked on a project on West Adams where that bike lane just went in, and we brought in trees as another component. And because it's a disadvantaged community, the trees could come for free, and there was even a watering agreement. But some of the business owners objected, saying, you're going to block my sign. Mm-hmm. So again, the idea that the only way people get there is by driving, and if they can't see your sign in full, they just won't stop at all. The other thing that's kind of even crazier that just happened maybe 4 months ago, is in West Hollywood. West Hollywood redid their section of Melrose. And it's near the Pacific Design Center. And there is a corner building. It's a law firm, I believe, or maybe it's something like that. And they were going to plant beautiful, nearly mature trees. Like the city was spending a lot of money to bring these huge trees in. And again, the guy was objecting to the streetscape project that would benefit everybody, saying, you're going to block my sign. So it really is an issue, of course, totally neglecting the fact that people love walking and patronizing places and spending time in places when they don't feel like a highway.
People don't want to walk on a sidewalk that has no sun. I think that should be a Google Maps option. Or sorry, no shade. When you can use for bikes now with Google Maps. When it started, I remember it didn't take into account hills. So sometimes it would. I was dating someone that lived in the San Gabriel Valley, far eastern end at that time, and I remember using, I would always go down Valley Boulevard because it was flat and because it's more pleasant and there's lots of stuff you want to see along the way. But Google Maps was like, why don't you go this other way that was through all these hills? And it was like the most direct way, but it ended up taking me, I think, 3 times as long. But anyway, with walking, I think it would be nice if there was an option to say, choose the shadiest route, I would choose the shadiest route every time. And so, people are, and also like, just ask yourself if you drive, how many times have you seen a sign and then pulled over and jumped out of your car and found parking or, just dealt with all that and then jumped in. Whereas when you're walking, a lot of times you're, even if it's a nice walk, a lot of times you're like, should we stop in here and check this place out? And I can't think of a single time I've been driving and then stopped to check something out because I saw it from a car. Like you really feel insulated in a car. Yeah. It doesn't even feel real. It's like it's just you're watching a movie screen.
Totally. Oh, I saw that today when I was taking the Rapid 7 down here. There's a whole back end section of Pico that there's a lot of like buildings here. There's a lot of businesses here. It looks like you could walk around. This is a pretty dense part of town that I had just never registered before. Since I rarely go past. Is it the 405 that goes across Pico? Anyway, I never cross the highway that is the border out of Santa Monica, farther down Pico. So that whole section, spend a lot of time on, never get farther than that. I'm not going to drive there, but going through on the bus, just taking a look like, oh boy, I totally want to, make a trip down here if I have a day off to just go hang out and explore.
I have done that. Yeah, I can think of specific times I've done that on a bike where I've gone through an area on a bus and I've thought, this looks interesting. Like I want to come back here, It's funny, but yeah, never in a car.
Yeah. So I saw something on, I think it might have been Streets blog about HLA that similar to how only 5% of the mobility plan was enacted, something like the city has yet to act on many of the HLA measures. Do you know anything about that or about its implementation so far?
The city has yet to do anything under the HLA. So we're recording this in July. The election was about 4 months ago to the day. And the city does not have its ducks in a row on how to implement HLA, how to implement its own mobility plan. So what they've done instead is they've essentially paused all repaving on any street that has mobility plan treatment until they figure it out. There's a couple of exceptions. Hollywood Boulevard, which was announced before HLA, is actually being done right now, and I'm very excited about it. And there's one other one. But in general, the city has just pushed the pause button. Yesterday at council, finally, the full council passed implementation ordinance instructions that now go back to the city attorney and DOT and Public Works to say, come back to council with a plan to implement HLA. The rumor on the street is that has already been going on, the construction of that plan. And on August 7th, which is the first meeting of the Transportation Committee after the recess, they're going to hear that plan. We think the plan is pretty good from what we've seen. The city does seem to be making a good faith effort. However, there's a few exceptions which we are trying to get changed. There's 2 big ones. The city is trying to say if anything is grant funded, HLA doesn't apply. Well, we didn't say that in our ordinance, so they're kind of just making that up. But it's under the premise that, well, if we change the scope of a grant-funded project, we could lose the money, which in theory is true. But under this USDOT anyway, or Caltrans, in the current environment, if they say, you know what, we're going to modify this to put in a bike lane, I highly doubt the funding is just going to evaporate. So that's kind of not true. The other big thing is they're trying to exclude any collaboration with another agency. So for example, LADOT and Metro working on something. They're trying to say HLA doesn't apply. That's complete BS. So we are trying to get both of those things changed. We want to support the final ordinance. We're not excited about those 2 things.
Can I don't, well, maybe you can speak to how much, if any, involvement Streets for All had in them, but you touched on access to Hollywood. I would love to just talk about that a little bit because, well, I want to know when it's going to get done, and it looks like it's going to get done pretty soon.
It's already done on certain blocks. I mean,
really?
It's moving really fast. So let's back up.
Yeah, maybe explain what access to Hollywood is.
Yeah. Under the former council member, Mitch O'Farrell, who Streets for All was no fan of, he had this one project called Heart of Hollywood, which was to redo the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The Hollywood Walk of Fame is one of the most popular tourist attractions in the city. And when tourists get there, they're just basically completely disappointed.
Yeah.
It's really grim. There's not a lot of places to walk. It doesn't feel great. He had this project under Hugo Soto Martinez, who is very friendly to this stuff. He said, well, I want to go beyond that. And so right now, between Gower and Lyman, which is past Vermont, so I want to say it's about 3 miles.
Almost to the
3.5
Vista
miles.
Theater.
Yes, almost to the Vista
People that know
Theater.
that.
They are reconfiguring Hollywood Boulevard. It's the longest single road reconfiguration in LA's history. And it's over 3 miles. They're removing a travel lane and they're putting in protected bike lanes. It's going to dramatically slow down Hollywood Boulevard. It's going to make it safer to walk and bike on. It's going to be more pleasant. It'll be quieter, less pollution, and it's going to be open in time for the Ciclovia on August 18th.
Whoa!
Which is so exciting. And the most amazing thing is they just started this work about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there's already portions done, which tells you how quickly we can do things when we want to do them and we get out of our own way.
Yeah, I was on it probably about 5 days ago, and I was like, it looks like it's about ready to go. But yeah, it was happening really fast.
It's amazing. And in your neck of the woods, or close to your neck of the woods, they are going to extend it to where Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset meet. And so you will have soon a bike facility essentially from Dodger Stadium-ish all the way to La Brea.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
So one thing that has come up a lot in conversation today is council meetings. And can y'all talk a little bit about the importance of going to your council meetings?
That's actually what I was going to ask about too. I was going to ask specifically how you can get more involved with the city council's transportation committee, and if there's a way of getting things agendized by them, because it's a very easy process to get stuff agendized at the neighborhood council level committees. But then sometimes it feels like the city is impenetrable and that maybe neighborhood councils aren't always designed to increase democratic engagement at the city level. You were on neighborhood council, right? And I was on neighborhood council.
Yeah.
So you're talking to
right. But so
who know.
right, but
Yeah,
like just for like your general lay folks,
absolutely.
right? Like it's so hard to find this information.
Most people,
right?
when I tell them I'm on neighborhood council, they introduce me as like, this is Eric, he's on city council. I'm like, I'm not on city council.
No one knows what neighborhood council is. It's incredibly
There's 99
esoteric.
neighborhood councils in the city, and it's the level down from city council, but it's a big step because they get paid 200-something thousand a year. We get neighborhood councilors are volunteer, but they are both elected officials.
I would say first, for anyone that wants to influence city policy, not much happens at the city council level. It almost all happens in committee and behind the scenes between committee and city council. And the reason that's important is to say, if you show up at city council, there's something on the agenda you want changed. It's probably not going to happen unless you've had prior conversations with the council member who supports you and others to back them up. So the committees are incredibly powerful and incredibly important. It's where the details get done. How to get something on the agenda? There's a few ways. You can submit a request to the chair of the committee. So in the case of the Transportation Committee, that would be Councilmember Heather Hutt. In the case of Public Works, it'd be John Lee. And then you can also have other members of the committee suggest to the chair that they agendize something. But it's frankly just up to the chair if something makes it onto the agenda.
And it's hard to find that stuff online. Like, just search up who is on this committee, who's in charge of this committee.
The city's website is kind of in shambles.
It's really crazy.
But
it's
think
GeoCities.
I think the neighborhood council, though, can have a strong voice here depending on who the council member is. So there are examples like, I think, for example, Tracy Park has written off certain neighborhood councils in CD11 she just doesn't agree with. It's kind of just as if they're not even opining. Paul Koretz did the same thing with the North Westwood Neighborhood Council, the Mid-City West Neighborhood Council. When we'd ask for something, he kind of didn't care. But when the Westwood Neighborhood Council asked for something, he was right there.
Interesting.
So it often depends on the council member. When it comes to transportation, C13, Hugo Soto Martinez, very friendly to it. Nithya Raman, very friendly to it.
Yeah, those are both, my neighborhood's representatives, and their teams are, I will say, very responsive and come to meetings. They come to our committee meetings if we ask them to, and they reply to emails after a few days and then apologize for taking so long. It's not. Well, I mean, we asked Mitch O'Farrell once to send his transportation. Well, first of all, we said, "Who is your transportation deputy?" Because
They don't all have one.
no, and we were like, "Do you have something like that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then we're like, "Can you send them to our transportation committee?" We just want to meet the Hollywood DOT guy and different but yeah, Mitch O'Farrell's office was just like, "Why?" We're like, why do you think? It's the transportation committee. We just want to talk to your transportation deputy about stuff. But they were just like, don't get back to us.
It depends on the council member. I'd say between Katie Yaroslavsky, Nithya Raman, and Hugo Soto Martinez, that's a good group. Eunice Hernandez's office is pretty good too. Tracy Park, a little bit tougher on this stuff. But Nithya was actually the first candidate that Streets for All backed that won. And that was the first time an incumbent had lost in 17 years.
And I believe she also won with more votes than anybody had ever gotten for city council, too.
Incredibly popular.
And then immediately people were like, let's recall her.
Yes. Well,
Which was also funny because all the people that they were faced with recall efforts were not the ones that were being indicted by the FBI.
I think she approved a project in Los Feliz that was 2 stories higher than the community wanted, and then they're like, we need to recall her.
I always wonder about, the people, because you do hear this on neighborhood council a lot, people saying like it's out of step with the neighborhood's character. And so Silver Lake has buildings that are 110 years old that are 5 stories tall. So I always wonder, but if somebody proposes building something that's 3 stories tall, I've seen people say Manhattanization, which I'm like, no, this isn't even like Des Moineization, like 3 stories tall. This is not even Silver Lake. Like if 110 years ago we went from 2 stories to 5, and then we went from 5 to 2, like it doesn't seem, I don't know. I just wonder can please define for me neighborhood integrity and character. It's like we used to build bigger developments in Silver Lake that had no parking too.
I was taking similar, I guess on a related note, I was taking an urban studies class at SMC this past winter. And one of our first assignments was we had to look at our city's, zoning plans and their, for the next however many years, 10, 20 years. And when I started reading through Santa Monica's, where I live at the start of it, I was like, oh, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. One thing that initially early in the class that I read, they're like, oh, we want to like preserve the character of our neighborhoods, which, in some contexts.
Bring back horses and buggies is what I say then.
Apparently the apartment building that I used to live in was the bottom floor, like back in the olden days, was a horse stable, and the top floor was a brothel.
Yeah, you got to restore that.
The old lady in our building. But like initially when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, great. So that means that like, the neighborhood that I live in that has a lot of apartment buildings, it's, fairly upzoned, it's walkable, like great, this is wonderful. But then I got to thinking later in the term, and after kicking the stuff around a lot more, well, wait a second, that kind of sounds like NIMBY protectionism. Like, oh, you mean to tell me that like the backside of Ocean Park is going to allow adding a story or two to their, half the town of single family homes? Unlikely. I guess initially at the start of the course, my enthusiasm for like, yeah, great, this is all awesome, turned to maybe some more skepticism. Like, wait, hey, I gotta read into this more and read between the lines.
There's a really funny example of this kind of like extreme NIMBYism that I think in Highland Park. Highland Park, like a lot of older Los Angeles neighborhoods, was heavily developed during the Craftsman period. So when they built a Jack in the Box like 20 years ago, they required it to look like a Craftsman Jack in the Box drive-through, which is just such a weird monstrosity. And it went further though, because there was a grocery store in Highland Park that was built in the 50s or 60s, and it was in the Googie style. So it was authentic to when it was built. They redid that in a Craftsman-looking style. So there are non-functional decorative beams that are designed to look like it was built in the Craftsman style. And then a few years ago, Metro was trying to build housing on a Metro-owned parking lot. And they said no, because it will be out of step with the neighborhood character. And they said, what if we made them look like Craftsman homes? They're like, no, we have to preserve this historic car storage area next to the train line.
Well, that excuse, the neighborhood character thing, is so common.
Yeah.
And it's also so ridiculous because everyone has a different definition of how
Right.
far to go back.
Exactly.
If we went back 100 years ago, the neighborhood character would be streetcars everywhere.
Right, exactly.
And there would be very few parking garages.
You would not be able to leave your car on the street at night, overnight. That would be like, oh, no, you can't do that. Sorry.
So I'm in favor of preserving neighborhood character.
Yeah, right.
There would also be racial and ethnic segregation and certain, other things. Like if we were totally authentic to the
redlining
period.
maps from another part of this urban studies class too. We had to look at the redlining maps for our various neighborhoods and all of that, and it was really eye-opening to see. Like the part of town that I live in was labeled as extremely dangerous, meaning like, oh, there's a big Latino population here. How was that bad?
Boyle Heights was described as hopelessly heterogeneous, which I love the way that sounds.
Too many different types of
It's
people.
there's Japanese people, there's Russians, there's Jews, there's blacks, there's Mexicans. Like it's a mess. We're just going to build all the freeways there.
Yeah, I think it has 6 different freeway
It
interchanges.
has a lot of freeways,
Jesus.
and it's very loud. Yes, because of freeways, because of that hopeless heterogeneity.
I guess bouncing on that, for people who are listening to this who might be a little bit on like the greener side, as I guess I am to this, I'm largely new to the activism side of it, not new to getting around on a PEV and bike lanes, but how do you suggest people start getting involved? Like, let's say you're coming into this with just, hey, maybe you just got a bike. Like, what do you recommend folks do to start getting involved in transit and, ditching their cars?
Well, I want to caveat by saying I didn't know shit about advocacy 5 years ago. So nobody's an expert in this stuff. You just learn as you go, you talk to people. It's frankly not that complicated. You just find the incentives that people care about, people in power, and then you push on those incentives. I think the first step is just realizing that your built environment can change, that your city can change, your street can change. I didn't realize that until I really started thinking about it. And I think people think, oh, it's concrete. The tree is that way. Like everything is just there, and it's not SimCity. We're not in a simulation here.
Everything will always have to be as it is now, or as it was when I got here. That's how I feel like a lot of people think.
Once you realize that's not true, once you realize you can actually change your street, your town, your city, your block, things start to get interesting. Okay, then how do you want to change it? Oh, I want a bike lane. I just bought a bicycle. All right, who controls that decision? If you're in the city of Santa Monica, it's different than if you're in the city of LA compared to a different city. But find out who makes that decision. Then you go to that person and you say, I want a bike lane here. What do you need from me? What do you need to be convinced of? And how do you need to be convinced of it to approve that? They might say, we don't have the money. Okay, who do I talk to at Public Works about applying for a grant? They might say, I don't think people are ready to lose a travel lane there or parking there. That sounds too crazy. Okay, if I get a petition of 100 of my neighbors all signing it on this stretch, is that enough? And whatever their checklist is, just jump through their hoops. If you are persistent, people just give up. They send an email, they don't hear back, and they say, oh, forget it. They pick up the phone and they make a call and nobody responds, or responds once and never responds again. They give up. If you're just persistent and you figure out what the elected needs to get to a yes, I think that's how to make change.
And 5 years is honestly not a long time, because that must be about when I came to a Streets for All meeting that was, I think, in Culver City. We were reading Stephen Higashide's Better Buses, Better Cities and discussing that. And I think I had maybe met Adrian Hoff at CoMotion, which is no longer called that. And
it is still called that.
I thought it was something different now.
I don't think so.
Okay. But it was like a mobility conference. And then we started talking, and then she was talking about Streets for All. And I was like, I keep seeing that on Twitter, which is definitely not called that anymore. I keep seeing suggested that I follow that. And I think just, you start to find like-minded people that have where some of your goals are shared. And
that's when it gets really fun. I mean, if you just started riding a bicycle and you don't know where to begin, and then you meet one other person that rides a bicycle, you have this connection because you immediately know what it's like to feel like you're going to die on the street. You immediately know the power of flying past cars at rush hour and how that feels. You just get the freedom of a bicycle. And you have a camaraderie there.
It does feel like you unlock something. And I've talked about this before about people getting resentful when they find out you don't have a car. I was talking to this woman once. She wanted to sell her salsa at the grocery store that I work at. And she was like, who gets groceries delivered? And I was like, well, actually a lot of people, because one of the main reasons people say they need a car is like, well, how do you get groceries? It's like, well, first of all, I just walk to the grocery store. Yep. But like people do in most countries. But here, I believe in the US, it's something like 83% of trips to the grocery store are made in a car. And people stock up for the apocalypse and then come back the next month. But she was like, yeah, I guess there are people that don't have cars. How sad. And I was like, I don't have a car and I don't want one. And she was like, well, how do you get around? And I was like, I ride the bus, I walk, I ride a bike, I save $13,000 a year, according to AAA, who have a vested interest in me driving by not owning a car, which allows me to live in a walkable city that I would not be able to live in if I had to pay $13,000 a year on car tickets and payments and maintenance and all that other stuff. And she got really mad and was like, well, congratulations. I guess you've got it all figured out. I was like, you seem very bitter that I don't drive. Like, is your solution for people like me that don't have cars to get cars? Is that what you want? More cars on the road? You hate cyclists. You wish they would all get cars and add that to, like,
we're working against,
thinking it through.
We're working against 100 years of society telling people that it's the American dream to own a car. It's the freedom machine. It's the ultimate thing. And also your self-worth is directly proportional to the fanciness of your car.
Absolutely. James Bond drives cool cars.
He doesn't ride a bike.
The 40-year-old virgin rides a bike.
So I did this video with Ed Begley Jr. And we were trying to prove that you actually don't need a car to get groceries and run errands. And he's 6'4", and he climbed into the bucket of an Urban Arrow. And we hooked up GoPros and mics, and we had a production crew following us. And we had a conversation. And we had this conversation about in Hollywood, the guy riding the bike is always the loser. It's the guy that falls off, the nerd, the guy that doesn't get the girl he wants, whatever it is. And the guy that is successful in life clearly has the hot car, and as soon as you get successful in life, you're going to go buy a Porsche, whatever the stereotypes. And I joke with my wife that if we ever got divorced, I don't think I'd be able to get remarried because I'd pick her up on a tandem bicycle and she'd say, who's this homeless guy that can't afford a car? But maybe that's a good litmus test. If she hopped right on and thought that was cool, then there's something there.
It's funny. I did get asked that not that long ago. I was at the bar next to my house and someone was like, was asking me about dating, and they were like, how do people that don't have cars date? And I was like, you just the same way you do you're not going to rent a car and then pick them up in that car, but you can ride bikes together, you can walk together, you can take transit together. I always tell people, like, think about your favorite city outside of the US. How do you get around when you've been there on vacation? Do you go to Paris and then think like, okay, I got to buy a car and sell it when I leave, or I need to rent a car? I don't know anyone that goes to Paris or London and rents a car. And no one complains about it. No one's like, oh, I had to take the train and ride my bike and walk places.
But they also assume that level of convenience around walking, public transportation, and biking simply can't exist here.
We are unique because it doesn't.
We are unique in this world. There's something different about the soil of Los Angeles that just can't
It's like we can't have good bagels, we can't have pizza, and we can never walk anywhere. It's just impossible. Even though for 13,000 years, people lived in what's now Southern California without cars. Wilshire Boulevard was a trail for people that used boats to get to the tar pits and bring tar back to make waterproof their boats. Like, people used to do it.
Do you guys know the mall that gets more visitors than Disneyland each year?
The Americana.
Close.
Yeah.
The Grove.
The Grove.
Same developer.
Same developer.
That's an amazing stat. And when you think about it, what is the Grove? It is a pedestrianized street with a streetcar,
where
some
people
grass,
stand in
some
line
trees,
to ride
a fountain.
The streetcar.
It's a street like we all wish we lived on, but we assume it can't exist here.
It's funny too because it is one of those places where you drive, you park in the parking structure, and then you wait in line to take a streetcar that doesn't go anywhere. And people in Los Angeles have gotten used to having these walkable places that they drive to and store their car for a while. One of the as far as I know, the first street to pedestrian plaza in Los Angeles was Olvera Street, which I think in 1928 they said we're not allowing people to park their cars on here. That's basically was the main thing. Everyone talks about Christine Sterling having this vision of what, a Mexican town should look like and all that stuff. But it's really was just the really transformational thing. And you see it in Little Tokyo too, is just saying, we're not going to put cars here.
It's very rare in LA. In Silver Lake, you have the triangle. It's very small. 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica generates
I think?
a fifth of the sales tax revenue for the entire city. That 3 or 4 blocks.
And that had cars on it till 65, I believe. Yeah,
Yes.
It was just parking.
So-
it was just
so-
a street with cars.
I don't understand. These spaces are popular when they happen, and yet somehow we don't do a ton more of them.
You would think expand it so that they're connected, so you have a whole strip of walkable.
I think that could eventually be Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, Hollywood Boulevard near Highland is closed about half the year anyway
Absolutely,
for premieres.
yeah.
Fully pedestrianizing that street, which has a metro right underneath, which has a bike lane on top. It could still have buses. I mean, that's not a terrible idea, kind of like 14th Street in New York
I would
City.
love to see more streets converted into pedestrian promenades, like Little Ethiopia. I always feel like there's service alleys. If you need to get stuff delivered to the restaurants, there's service alleys in the back that the trucks use for that. So it's just for cars going through along Fairfax that go through Little Ethiopia or Thai-town or Tehrangelis. Like you have all these little pockets where it's like it would be so much nicer if you could just dine outside in the street here and walk around and not have loud cars going past.
I think what Angelinos need to realize is not every street needs to be optimized for car travel.
Yeah.
And not every street needs to be optimized for cut-through traffic. Who likes cut-through traffic other than the people cutting through? I mean, it sucks.
But it's a slippery slope. Then you'll take away all the streets from the cars.
So I'd like to pivot just slightly to a very practical question, going right back to our initial sound check discussion. How do you do LAX on a bike? I am waiting for my first bike. It is a folding bike to arrive. I got a Turn B8. So my evil scheme is to, I don't know, maybe fold the bike, stash it in a drum cymbal case or something, and take it with me when I travel. But anyway, how do you do LAX on a bike?
You just bike there. You don't use the 405. So LAX is unique for a few reasons. It is one of the closest airports in the country to the majority of the city, if that makes sense. Everything else is pretty far. And so I live near Melrose and La Brea. It's about 12 miles. And so it takes me less than an hour, just under an hour, door to door, day or night, rush hour or not. I know that's what it's going to take. Whereas driving or in an Uber, it could be anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes to over an hour, depending on the horseshoe. And I'm sure we've all had stories of being stuck there and you're late for a flight.
The joy of going around LAX.
But to answer your question, I'll give 2 answers. If I am with kids and I have luggage, the kids go in the front of my electric cargo bike. There's 3 seats and seat belts. We have a Burley utility trailer that holds 2, maybe even 3 suitcases. You just bungee them down, and that goes in the back. That's how you get to LAX. We take residential streets, a combination of residential streets, Venice Boulevard, and Ballona Creek. And Ballona Creek, which is a car-free bike and jogging path down a waterway, is great, and it actually has an exit very close to the airport. And Sepulveda has a bike lane almost all the way into the airport. So it's actually surprisingly doable, and it sounds crazy, and then once you do it, I will say once you're in the horseshoe, you are allowed to use the curb area where now it's restricted to buses. So you're allowed to go there too. Cool. And because the buses, there's not so many buses, you basically have a very wide area that cars aren't allowed in. You just have to look out for pedestrians, that's it, to go throughout the entire airport. There is free bike parking in Terminal 6. It's covered. It's very convenient. And actually, I have one of the Streets for All volunteers, the JetBlue pilot, and we worked closely with him. We did a fun video with him biking to his job at LAX. And together, we've been working on LAX management, and they have, to their credit, responded and increased the bike parking. So there's probably spaces for about 40 or 50 bikes now covered in Terminal 6. You just mentioned you got a folding bike, so I want to tell you one more thing. I have a Brompton, and I got it so I could travel with it. And so last summer, I was going to the UK for something. I got on my bike. Brompton have these bags that clip in front. That was my luggage. I biked to LAX. I folded up the bike. I put it in the special case that turns into a backpack, and I took it through security and put it in the overhead bin, flew to Europe, and that was my bike in Europe.
Oh my God.
So folding bikes are the true freedom machines. And the amount of freedom you have when you have your luggage and your bike, you can just go anywhere, anytime, because you're not bogged down by the logistics.
And then you rented a car when you got to the UK?
Then I rented a Cadillac Escalade and threw it in the back and drove away.
Yeah, that's the one flaw of my one wheel, which is primarily how I get around. I stuff it in a backpack, hop on the bus. So it's an electric skateboard. I don't have it today, but it's an electric skateboard. So there's a big old wheel in the center of it, and there's two pads in the side of it, and you kind of ride it like you would a snowboard. But I can stuff it in a duffel bag, stuff it in my backpack. I'll take the trains, take the buses, go to shows like that. It is so fantastic.
It is so much fun. I mean, I can't speak to riding a bike and flying somewhere, but just riding my bike to Metrolink or Amtrak and then taking that somewhere and then riding around another town and not having to think about horrible parking lots or wherever, it's just so nice to be able to, and you're like, I'm so far away and I've got my bike.
I'd say having your own bike is just so amazing. I've done that to New York. I've done it. I was in Paris last summer and I'm like, this is my bike. This is incredible. It's weird almost.
Yeah.
And but then you get used to it and you're like, I don't want to rent a bike. It's not going to be exactly the way I want. I want my own bike. And folding bikes when you're on your own are so much fun.
Can I ask something for my own activist campaign? Okay, so the city, just to set a little background, the city declared its first public square, Pershing Square, I think, in 1918, and then it declared another one on the border of Boyle Heights in East Los Angeles in the 60s, and then Los Angeles Square. And those are all real public squares because they are public spaces that can hold rallies or whatever, and they have concerts and ice skating and blah, blah, blah. Ever since then, the city has loved to just designate intersections public squares by throwing a little beige sign up. They do it almost every week. I mean, there are
kind of the equivalent of putting up bike route and not doing anything else, saying this is a nice place to bike.
It feels, it's like a Shero or something, but for public squares, just saying like, hey, this is a public square now. And I was thinking like, is there a way we can say you need to implement a minimum amount of like standards of making this something like a public square? Because like the Zocalo in Mexico City is a public square. Tiananmen Square is a public square. Red Square is a public square. Trafalgar Square is public square. I Love Lucy Square is not a public square. It is an intersection with a beige sign that says it's a square. There's not seating. There's not trash receptacles. There's nothing.
Because where would people park?
How would they get to this square?
Where would you build the parking?
But because there's over 100 now, and we asked the city clerk, and they're like, we don't keep like a tally of them or have any list of them. I'm like, so I started making a map of them. And I was like, there's so many that sometimes it's like every block is a square. I'm like, we should just say these squares all have to have these, and then they just link together.
Well, so let me tell you a story. When I first got into the neighborhood council, I became chair of the transportation committee, and I inherited a project called Stanley Plaza. And the project was to put on Stanley and Melrose, just north of Melrose, for maybe, I'll call it 300 feet, a pedestrianized space. It meant it was in front of some businesses. There was going to be some picnic tables and some umbrellas and some street art on the asphalt. And it was incredibly controversial. People on Stanley didn't want to have to drive one extra block, east or west, to get to Melrose. They just wanted to be able to get to Melrose. And so, I remember going door to door trying to save this. Again, I inherited this. I didn't start this project. And there was so much hostility to it. What if we need emergency services? They're going to be, out of their way by one block.
Yeah.
What are the trade-offs as a society we're willing to have nice things? If I lived on Stanley, I would love something like that. And I wouldn't care that I need to go one block out of my way to get to Melrose. That's maybe an extra 20 seconds. I wouldn't care because it'd be worth it to me. And all over the city, there's so many squares we could do on things like that. I Love Lucy Square. That's in front of Paramount, right?
Yes, I believe so.
On Melrose. I know where that is. There's an old restaurant there. There's Paramount's old entrance. I mean, you could block off 300 feet between the alley and Melrose on the south side of the street and actually have a square.
Mm-hmm. Put some benches out there.
Yeah,
some trees,
street furniture.
A fountain.
The other thing...
I say even just a stanchion explaining what does this area have to do with I Love Lucy?
The other problem, and it kind of is infecting everything, is the issue of homelessness. Mm-hmm. The other thing about Stanley Plaza is people were like, well, what's going to prevent someone from just pitching a tent? And how is this not going to become an encampment? And LAPD was, well, we don't have the resources to police this, and So it wouldn't, basically the neighbors felt like any public space we do right now, because of the homelessness crisis, is going to get taken over.
It's kind of the same argument against benches. People say, well, homeless people are just going to sleep on them. And I say, well, if there's like 45,000 unsheltered homeless, then let's put out 90,000 benches, because then you can't sleep on more than one bench. And then maybe after that, try housing.
We could solve, on a temporary basis, homelessness by the amount of spare parking spaces we have in the city.
3.3 parking spots for every car. I believe 18.6 million parking spots.
Yeah.
An area larger than Pasadena if they were all just put together.
Do you know the lot on Formosa in West Hollywood? It's this old historic studio. It was MGM back in the day, or maybe Warner Brothers. Anyway, they have a 7-story parking structure that is vacant 99% of the time. They only use it for special events. That probably has 1,000 parking spaces. And I see people in tents near it, and I can't stop thinking it's not luxury, etc. But if you put some porta potties and some services, and you offer them
feels
just
like
to
a
be
start.
Indoors, you could do a shipping container and make it nice. I mean, there's so many
Church
things.
parking lots are like that. I'm like, how often is this used? Sunday morning by like 12 people, maybe.
We could solve homelessness if we didn't care more about storing cars than storing people.
And we haven't, right, we have parking minimums, parking mandates since 1930. Big government tells you how much parking you have to put with every kind of development based on a formula that makes absolutely no sense and is completely arbitrary. But meanwhile, we haven't built any public housing since 1951, I don't believe. So, and we also downzoned the city after they declared racial housing covenants unconstitutional at the Supreme Court. They downzoned the city from a residential capacity of 10 million to 4 million, in part so that we could use economic segregation, single-family housing, to say, you can't live here if you can't afford a single-family home. So if you're a renter or you want to live in a bungalow court or something, you need to go somewhere else.
So your point is we're full.
Yeah, we're full because we cut the glass in half. We cut 60% off the top of the glass and then said, oh my God, it's overflowing.
The other thing I can't figure out, and I want to give credit to the Livable Communities Initiative and LCI, just the thinking behind it, which is a lot of our commercial corridors have single-story commercial buildings. Nothing up top. How much busier would that dry cleaners, that coffee shop, that restaurant be if there were 2 or 3 stories, nothing crazy, just 2 or 3 stories of housing above it?
I've had people say in neighborhood council that oppose developments of parking lots into housing with commercial. So I'm like, we're adding business space and residential space and getting rid of car storage. And they're like, I just don't like mixed use buildings. What? Why? You don't have to live in it then, but I would love to.
Then they must hate New York City and Paris and London.
I mean, when I was in Seoul, I stayed in a place where it was just so nice. Some days you just don't feel like, you're on vacation and you're like, oh, there are multiple restaurants that are great in the bottom floor, coffee shops, cafes, a market. And then I can keep my slippers on and just go downstairs and get stuff and then go. It's nice. And you could presumably get a job at one of those places if you wanted,
Well, the fight is usually over the parking. Okay, if you build 2,000 units on Melrose above commercial space, that's 2,000 to 4,000 cars. Where are they all going to park? And again, and LCI has made this point, you need to have alternatives to the car to make the housing element work. You can't assume that every housing unit we build in the future is going to come with a car. The math doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. It's a geometry problem. It's like you can't car your way out of this. I mean, that is one of the funny things about Fast and the Furious franchise is that it's always like, how can we do everything with cars no matter how impractical? It's like if they need to get to the top of a skyscraper, instead of taking the elevator, it's like, we could make this ramp and jump this car. I don't know if they've gone into space yet in that show, in that series, but it's that kind of car brain thinking where it's like, well, we got to get a car to do everything. All you would have to do to get away in like a car chase in a Fast and Furious movie is just ride your bike down a narrow alley and be like, oh, well, we can't fit our car. What if we tried to put the car on its side and then go to or just ride down a hill on a mountain bike? Be like, well, okay, then are we going to have a parachute for the car? Or I don't know. We don't need to shoehorn cars into everything. We were smart enough to not do it, to know how to have a city. Until the 1920s, we weren't the car capital, and we took it, or maybe it was the teens, but we took it from Iowa, which I lived in Iowa, and it would be really hard to bale hay and load hogs for slaughter on a cargo bike. But that makes sense to me to have vehicles in the country where there are no buses and everything is spread out in terms of you measure everything and how long it takes to drive in thousands of acres. But in a city, it's like, I think we're smart enough to figure out how to do this without cars.
Well, to be clear, Streets for All, there's a car in our logo. We're not trying to get rid of all cars. We're just opposed to having cars having all the space and priority like they do now.
I always just say it should be the last. It should be the last
Yeah.
resort instead of the first one. When you're trying to think of how to get somewhere, sometimes I have. The last time I used Lyft was because I couldn't find my umbrella. I went to the general store. They didn't have umbrellas. They only have like sriracha and expensive candles. And I was like, okay, so it's not really a general store. And I needed to speak at Emerson, and I was just like, there's not a bus that's going to get me there in time. So I downloaded. I put Lyft on my phone, took it, and then deleted it from my phone and took the bus home. But
Absolutely. I mean, I drive sometimes too. It's mostly when it's long distances, but yeah, we just need a balanced transportation system. Today, Angelinos aren't free. They don't have the freedom of choice to choose the transportation mode they want. They mostly drive because everything else takes too long or they perceive as too dangerous. Mm-hmm. And if we fix that, we actually have true freedom where the people that need to drive will drive and everyone else can have just a much better experience doing something else.
So it sounds to me like we need to come up, what I'm gathering from this conversation is we need to start a franchise that has a really, I don't know, like really cool buff dude on the bicycle, on his bike or their bike.
Or one wheel.
Their bike, their one wheel, whatever. They all get a lot of sex. And they're constantly doing impractical bike stunts, such as biking up the side of a building.
They're biking even when it makes no sense.
They're biking into space.
I need to bike. I need to get underwater. How are we going to make the bike
Yeah.
underwater bike? Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. How can people get involved with Streets for All?
Yeah.
We're at streetsforall.org. We're at Streets for All on every social media platform. What we try to do is let people know about opportunities to get involved. So today, for example, we posted a call to action on Metro's 605 freeway widening project. And we're asking people to go to these meetings or Zoom in when the Zoom one comes to protest it. Because somehow, when we are in a climate crisis and having the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth in the next few days in Death Valley in California, we are still trying to widen our way out of congestion because that's the way we've always done it. So that's an example, but every week we have opportunities for people to get involved, make their voice heard, and we try to make it super easy to do so. We give them talking points and point them in the right direction. The other thing that's really important is the election is coming up, and we need the right people elected in Santa Monica, in Culver City, in West Hollywood, in Burbank, and the city of Los Angeles to represent us and share these values. So we are making endorsements now. We're almost done with them. And then we need people to help us get these people elected. Text banking, door knocking, whatever they want to do. You don't need to be a people person. You could do it all from your computer screen in the comfort of your own home. Those are the two main things going on right now, aside from us watching the city like a hawk with HLA and making sure that they adopt a really strong implementation ordinance in about a month.
I feel like people are, in general, watching the city a lot more closely than they used to. I think some of that might be because the national level of politics is such a circus and we feel so powerless to have any effect that people are rightfully looking at what they can do at the local level and affect stuff. And I'll just say, I'll plug the happy hours because it's really nice to have, they get guests, Streets for All, that, like the Metro CEO, the Metrolink CEO, and you get to submit questions to them and talk to them and have them talk to you. And it's just this very direct engagement with people, and just hearing them be aware of people's concerns and stuff like that just feels impactful.
Thank you for the plug for our happy hour.
And it has happy hour in the name, so that's what,
Well, the idea behind that was to, not everybody may have access to the council member or to the CEO of Metro or whatever. And what we wanted to do there was give everybody the opportunity to have a conversation with them, to ask questions, and to hear from them what they have to say about these issues. So that's the idea behind it, to kind of democratize access to people in power making these decisions.
And because I went to the happy hour and got to ask Stephanie Wiggins a question, I recognized her the other day. I saw her walking after we taped an episode, and then I told Jane Ashley, I said, I just saw Stephanie Wiggins walking. She said, well, she's car-free now, too. And that's all because of Streets for All in this podcast. I like it. I'm just kidding.
How cool. So listeners, for us, presumably when this goes out, we'll have our socials you can follow, send us an email. You can contact me, contact Eric if there are topics you'd like us to cover, things you'd like us to go to,
Guests you'd like us to
have.
yeah.
Please reach out. Also, please leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever. That stuff really helps with outreach. And
if you're a literary agent and you want to get my book published, just get a hold of me.
all right, we'll see you on the trail, the bike, the bus.
Insert transit sounds here.